the agenda.
So moved.
Approval of the agenda moved by Councillor Merrow, seconded by Councillor Brown. All those in favor?
Yes.
Presentations. Staff Sergeant is unable to be with us today. He believed that Corporal Harris would be here. Corporal Harris, are you with us? Hearing that he's not, I suspect that we will see Constable Archibald at our next meeting. We'll make a note that RCMP were absent for presentation. Are there any petitions to table? Hearing none. Approval of the public question comment session. And at this point, we will turn a camera back on for anyone who wishes to speak.
Yes, I'd like to speak. Leon Robertson, do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
We see
Okay.
you.
Yes, Mayor Norman, a couple of comments here. Under 7.3, you have the water sewer upgrade and lower Waterloo Street, and we applied for that before a couple of years ago, and there's an application going in now for 75% funding. Before, it was when the funding was turned down, the project was turned down at that point. What is the outlook this time? If they don't give the funding, are we able to go ahead on our own and do that project? I know it's an urgent one.
That would be a decision of council. It was put off last time. It's approximately a $3 million project. It's a huge, expensive project. And I believe it was 3 million. And that would be a decision of council, whether they want to do that or not under full funding. But we are optimistic that this time around we may have approval.
Yeah, probably the second time around, you may get a better chance of getting the funding. Under 8.1, the boundary review, I realize you have to do one of those every 8 years, I believe it is. And I was wondering, from looking at the information provided, it looks as though that the 7 councillors that we have now and the number of people represented for each councillor, I was wondering, it seems to be, my only comment would be, I know you have to do the review, but if it ends up being the way it is now, it looks to be very fair and reasonable. Any comments?
No, that again is the decision of council, how they wish to move forward.
Okay, one other thing, just want to mention, I guess it'd be good news. Here recently, it's been noted in the news that the Yarmouth Ferry will be operating this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would think that would probably be good news to get the economy started a little bit. Anyway, that's all my comments, Mayor Norman. Thank you very much. And I will say, even though you won't see me, I'll still be here.
Thank you.
Still.
I do not see any other members here. Are there any other guests who wish to comment? Hearing none, approval of the minutes, regular council July 25th, 2022. Is there a mover and the seconder? It's been moved by Carl and Councillor Hvac and seconded by Councillor Fancy that the minutes be approved as presented. All those in favor?
Yes.
Contrary? Thank you. Liverpool Business Development Center HVAC investigation. There is a recommendation in the package. If someone would put that on the floor so Director Grant can discuss that. Councillor Brown.
I recommend that the Council of the Region of Queens Municipality approve the contracting of Hvac Energy Limited to conduct an HVAC investigation at 54 Harley Humphrey Drive, Liverpool, at a cost of $10,750 plus HST to be funded as an unbudgeted item in the call center operating budget.
And that is seconded by Councilor Romero. Director Grant, could you give us an explanation regarding the need for this?
I sure can. So the call center, originally constructed in 2002, 2003, has certainly had its share of ups and downs over the course of the last 2 decades. Typically, they're expected to last about 20 years in this climate due to the salt water and that kind of stuff in the air. Our recommendation from the consultant that I spoke with was to do a entry-level assessment of the unit in the facility itself to ensure that it's operating properly. If it's not, we can identify why it's not operating properly and take necessary steps to enhance its operation in the future.
Before I ask of questions from Councilor, could you tell me the value of that if we had to replace it?
I'm not in a position to speculate right now, but I expect it to be significant.
Are they like $100,000? Are they $50,000?
I would expect it to be more than $100,000, certainly, yeah.
Okay. I'll open the floor for any questions. Councilor Fancy.
Yes, Adam. I know that it seemed to be at the time back years ago of always putting one big unit in to heat the whole operation. Same thing as over the Queen's Place. But when you have something that goes down, it takes everything down along with it. As you know, I'm just saying things you already know. Would it be more feasible to, is this part of what they're going to be looking at, maybe putting smaller units in to accommodate each section? Would that be a more costly venture to go into? Or, and I guess it's, say when you're fixing something, it doesn't take everything down with it.
No, that's a good point. I mean, redundancy is always important with anything to ensure that we keep the system operating. So part of the scope of what they're going to do is to review the facility as it's constructed now, including the alterations that we've made, examine the heating, cooling loads, look at ventilation, look at what's there for equipment, including the building automation system, the computer that operates, the rooftop unit itself, the history of it, and all those things, and propose recommendations that we can consider for the future, whether it's immediate or long-term, to ensure continued operation.
Councilor Fancy, does that answer your question?
Yes, it is. I just wondered if it would, I was just seeing the, would it cost as much to put, say, small heat pumps into different sections compared to try and fix that big unit? I guess that's something what you're going to find out when you look at the whole matter.
It is, and right now, just so you're aware, there is 3 of the small residential style kind of heat pumps that you speak of operating in the server room. So I guess considering that there's 3 in that small area for the whole facility, it'd be a significant number of those style.
Questions, comments from other councilors? Any questions, comments from other councilors?
Councilor Merrow had her hand up.
Councilor Merrill?
Adam, how long is this going to take to complete?
The scope of the work that they're looking at should be completed, we expect, in 3 to 4 weeks.
And have we been having problems with this system?
We have been off and on, quite honestly, for the last 20 years. More recently, it's been more significant and unpredictable failures in the system. We've always been fortunate that we've been able to get it back up and running. Last summer, we were down for probably 3 to 4 weeks, and we had to call in outside technician from train the original manufacturer to come down. And it took 2 site visits from them to finally diagnose it, order some special parts, which are becoming obsolete, and get it back to functioning.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Counselor Charlton.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if this is something that could be put under the call center reserve instead of an unbudgeted item. The last thing that came through at our last council meeting came out of that reserve, so it didn't have any budget impacts. Just wondering about that.
Counselor Charlton, the motion is that it be funded as an unbudgeted item in the call center operating budget. So is that not the reserve?
No, it is not.
So how much, there's not enough funds left in the reserve as Counselor Charlton suggested to fund it from there?
There is substantial funds in the reserve as mentioned at the last meeting. However, it's staff's recommendation that it be an unfunded liability in the current operating budget and not funded from reserve.
Thank you.
Any other, Counselor Brown?
Yeah, I think since we're turning this into a business center and we've attracted some new tenants that fully fill the building, I think it's really important that we make sure the system works for our tenants. I don't think this is something that we can put off, and I think having the tenants in there, the revenue coming in is a lot higher than we expected, and I think that would probably more than offset the unfunded expense of doing this.
Any other comments or questions before I ask for the question? Hearing and seeing none, I'm going to ask for the question. All those in favor of the recommendation as presented? Contrary? Deputy Mayor Muse, you did not unmute yourself for that vote.
All right. Yes, I was in favor.
Anyway, it's passed. Solid Waste Management Facility tipping fees, Ms. Plummer, Manager of Finance. There is a recommendation the counselor will make prior to an explanation. Counselor Gidney.
I recommend that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality approve the tipping fee schedule as attached for reduced. Oh my gosh.
Residential.
Thank you. Residual municipal solid waste, sorter construction and demolition material, mixed construction and demolition material, blue bag recyclables, metal, white goods, contaminated soil and septic effective April 1st, 2022.
And that is seconded by Counselor Hawks. Ms. Plummer, a regular occurrence. Could you explain this?
Yeah, so this is just our annual housekeeping. You'll see this brought forward every year. The calculations are based on a rolling 10-year average, so you'll see that attached.
And this year's increase was 1.6%.
Correct.
It's
Questions or comments from council? Hearing and seeing none. Get ready, Deputy Mayor Muse. I'm going to ask for the question. All those in favor, raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
Boy.
Thank you. Negative. Passed. 7.3, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. There is a recommendation within the package. Councillor Brown.
I recommend that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality authorize the submission of an application under the Nova Scotia Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program for the replacement of water and combined sanitary and storm sewer on Lower Waterloo Street in Liverpool.
And that is seconded by Councillor Amaro. CEO McNeil. Just a brief backgrounder, please.
So council is well aware that we have an outfall at the end of Lower Waterloo Street. So we collect sewage and such down there, and it goes into the harbor untreated. We have applied several times in the past for provincial and federal funding to correct this. We have not been successful to date. And so this is our third or fourth kick at the can in the last 6 or 7 years, applying for the funding. We did do part of it. It was originally a $4.3 million project a few years ago. We did use 100% of our gas tax funding, I believe it was 2 years ago, and do one portion of it. And so now our rejigged numbers with all the new costing for labor costs, material costs and everything, including HST, is in the neighborhood of $3 million. If council agrees to proceed with this, then we'll finalize those numbers and submit the application. The unfortunate part is at the present time, the application deadline is April the 1st. And no decisions are going to be made, it says in the application or the preliminary application, for several months, which means if we are approved for funding, this project will not be able to be completed this year. It will have to wait until 2023 to start.
But we would be able to hold our funding money over until the next year.
If we are approved, we have 3 or 4 years to complete the project, yes.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Fancy and then Councillor Romero.
Well, it's an ongoing thing that has to be fixed because we can't, as we know, the situation there in Waterloo. I ask also too, though, maybe it's the wrong time to bring this up, but the couple houses down there across from, I think it's King Street. Can we, I don't know if this is the time to ask where we are with that, because that's another one of those things that's going to the harbor that do we need to address or not? I just so even I'll know and the public will know where we are with that.
Director Grant, could you give us a standing on those 2 homes?
Currently, there is still 2 homes connected to central sewer that are outfallen in the Mersey River. They've been identified to be eliminated by 2041, I believe, 2042, that time span. So there's still 20 odd years for remediation work to be undertaken when council so chooses.
Thank you. Councillor Romero, you had a question?
Yeah, I just would like to agree with Councillor Fancy. I think this is something that actually needs to be done. I don't think we can undertake that kind of project on our own, so it'd be great if we could get some funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, this is, I mean, since we've become a new council, this is an issue that's come up numerous times with the public and with, ourselves. I think we have to try to get funding to get this project off the ground. I don't think we can let it go. I don't also agree with Councilor Romero that we can't reasonably fund it ourselves at this point. But if this keeps failing, we may have to look at that option. But I think we have to put in the funding request.
Any other comments before I ask for the question? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Thank you. Against? Carried. Hillsview Acres renovations, 7.4. We've been at this, and we're not getting anywhere. But there is a recommendation in the package. Councillor Romero.
I move that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality reject all tenders for Hillsview Acres Project 21011-21084 Hillsview Acres renovations.
And that is seconded by Councillor Gidden. Director Grant, explain the reasoning. We know why it's in our package, but for those who are watching and without the background notes, Can you explain the reason for the rejection of the tenders?
Certainly. So I was here in June. We had at that time went out to tender with a project to alter a stairwell, and put 2 washrooms in. The funding for the project was granted based on estimates acquired by Hillsview staff. Likewise, 2 more projects were approved for funding by Department of Health. So we packaged all 3 of those together, feeling that it was probably our best approach to get our best price offer from the private sector for construction. The total value of the grants was $273,600. Our lowest bid came in at $475, nearly double what was approved. Clearly, there's some discontinuity between our estimates and what the private sector is doing work for these days, and we're just not in a position to do this work at that price.
So in summation, Department of Health approved our $273,600 to do work. But when we went to tender, those prices came in, one at $475,000 and one at $678,000. So we're rather short on that.
That's correct.
In conversation, I inquired why the difference. One of the suggestions was then the quotes that were gathered by Hillsview staff did not factor in. Department of Health requires all of this to be industrial type work because of the type of building Hillsview is. So therefore, these quotes all came back high, and they do not even include any architectural costs. So questions for Director Grant? Councillor Fancy?
Yes, I know all these things are a need going forward. Again, as we know now that things are going to change in the next couple of years, is there some things, and we even talked originally about doing some in-house work. I'm thinking of the bathroom in particular, of not having that extra bathroom which they need. Is there anything that we could see as prioritizing that even we could do in-house that could be a help? I don't know. I'm just bringing that to you.
Originally, back in June when we talked about it, I was under the impression that it was work that we could probably undertake ourselves. Having examined it further, it doesn't appear that we can do that work. We're not educated in the ways of I can't remember what the CSA standard is, but the virus mitigation through the buildings and that type of work of that nature, it's not our expertise. So we're not in a position right now to undertake any work at Hillsview.
Sadly. Any other questions? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, Adam, if the COVID restrictions are relaxed, is that what you mean by not being able to do it in-house because of the COVID restrictions that we're working under now? If that were to change, would that change our ability to do this in-house?
No, it's actually a CSA standard that came out long before COVID. It just deals with the migration of contaminants through buildings and long-term care facilities. So it deals with things like fiberglass, for example, or spores of that nature being dispersed through the building, and control measures that need to be put in place and equipment that you're required to have to do that type of work.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Any other questions? Councillor Romero?
Adam, can this facility still operate safely until a new facility is built?
It is my understanding that it's operating safely now, and it will continue to, but I cannot sincerely give you that answer.
Thank you.
Councillor Charlton?
Just following up on Vicky's question there. If it's believed that anything has to be rectified before we have a new long-term care facility, will there be something brought back and other ways to look at how we could rectify anything that's a priority under this?
If you're asking if we'll explore more cost-efficient alternatives for this work, then we're not done exploring those avenues. But for right now, clearly a tender process is not the solution to get a project completed out there.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Muse, get ready to unmute your phone. I'm going to ask for the question. All those in favor signify by raising your hand or saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Opposed? Carried. Matters of discussion. 8.1 is a boundary review process which we are required to do by the provincial government. It's a two-step process. It involves council deciding if they are going to remain with 7 councillors. And it also involves looking at boundary lines. There are several ways we can do this. Some municipalities decide to do it with existing staff, thereby using the staff that we currently have. Other municipalities hire this out to get an unbiased opinion. We also are highly recommended by the provincial government to do public consultation as part of the process. So when you read through the documents provided from the province, they said the first thing the council has to decide is if they are in agreement with the present number of existing councillors. Once that has been decided upon, then you move forward and you begin the process of looking at boundaries, keeping in mind that you need approximately 10% of your population dispersed in each district. And it also looks at communities of interest and other things. So this is placed here as a discussion point. We do not have to reach a decision or a discussion or a recommendation to next council at this point in time, but we do have to come up with it perhaps at the next meeting. Because if we are hiring an outside person, then we will require that as a budget item, whatever. So the floor is open for discussion, and I invite all feedback. This is an important thing to do. We have to do it. Boundary reviews, every municipality in the province is doing it. And it must be completed by December of this year. So the floor is open for discussion. Councillor Brown.
I'll open up by saying that I think, in my opinion, we should move to an 8-councillor system from the 7 that we have now. It would allow us to realign the communities of interest a little better. I know in my particular case, the area is not as large as, say, District 7, but it's a linear distance, which makes it harder for councillors to cover both of the areas in the district. And with the number we've got right now, the town of Liverpool has 5 councillors representing a portion of it, which, you know, when you look at outside the county, some of the people feel that this gives the town of Liverpool more power on council than maybe it should have in other circumstances. Going with 8 councillors would also put us in a position where the mayor would have a tie-breaking vote, and we would have less decisions lost to a tie vote. So we would have more resolution on things. They would either be soundly defeated, soundly accepted, but very few left in limbo on tie votes. My feeling.
Interesting comments. Other comments or opinions? Councillor Fancy.
I think we are good with 7, myself personally, but I think how they're laid out could be a little different. I think in particular with Councillor Brown, he's got a large area for the amount of numbers he has. And I don't know how this would work out with Councillor Merrow, but I think these places like Port Medway could be into Brooklyn, where it could be closer related than the Councillor Brown having to swing out so wide. And I even think where I am, even where I grew up by the landfill, that could be possibly looked at with Councillor Brown because it might be closer to him. It's just, I think sometimes the layout isn't quite, it doesn't work quite well because if Councillor Brown has to go somewhere, he has to go a long ways a lot of times just to get to certain areas.
Thank you. Councillor Romero.
I agree with Councillor Fancy. I believe 7 is fine, but I do believe that the areas could be aligned better.
Councillor Charlton.
I support those comments as well. I'm just curious, was there at one point 8 councillors and it was less, like it was taken down to 7, including making the area that David Brown represents now larger? I'm just trying to, I feel like I know there was a difference at some point, but I'm not clear on how that looked.
I believe we had 9. And Chris, C.A. McNeil, correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe in 2000, there may have been 9 councillors. And when we did this process, it was lessened by 2 due to the UARB making decisions and lessening up what was suggested. We all have to keep in mind that the comments we put forward to the UARB board aren't necessarily accepted, and they do have ultimate authority in the end to make our decision for us. So I was part of council on the last boundary review, and we reduced the number so that the UARB board did not reduce it. And then came the problem of making the numbers plus or minus 10 work. Hence, Deputy Mayor Muse's district, which currently did not run into and include Liverpool, included parts of Liverpool, the Milton, Jack, I believe you were on council at the time. Your district was changed and included part of Bristol. Councillor Brown, your district did not include Port Medway and Mill Village at that point in time. There were more councillors and their districts were more in the keeping of their communities. But because it was felt the URB was going to make some changes, the numbers were reduced to 7. And also because of social communication and the ability to reach out to people. Councillor Brown, you were the one district of all that the community of interest was deemed to be the Medway River. And even though that really doesn't make sense because, you know, people in Port Medway really don't share the same community of interest as people in Malaga Lake or Greenfield. However, those are things that we have to decide upon. If we keep but the first decision is, do we maintain 7? Do we reduce to 6? Do we increase to 8? So that's the point at which we start. And from that point, then the decision is, do we hire outside or do we do it within to look at what the communities of interest are, how to work with that plus or minus 10% in population points. That is what they aim for, is 10% population, give or take. But they do in circumstances allow it to sway a bit higher, but they like the plus or minus 10. But if you're an area that you're all spread out and you can't match, but those are things that whoever is in charge of this project has to present back to us as what works. And of course, with public communication, the public also have their say. So for example, as expressed by Councillor Brown, maybe people in Liverpool would like to have one or two councillors who are only theirs and only attend to those matters. And maybe Deputy Mayor Muse will look after everything westward with more of a rural look. But what the picture looks like in the end, we have no idea. The census numbers will be released soon, so there'll be new census numbers to work with. It's difficult to say whose areas have increased in year-round population, whose areas have decreased in year-round population. So they'll be using those new census numbers to come up with the electoral voting districts. So that's a roundabout way of saying, I don't know, the first thing is 7, less, more, or the same. And then how do we go about coming up with the paperwork that's required by the provincial government by the end of this year? Does that answer your question, Councillor Charlton?
Yeah, I just, yeah, I guess I'm fine with 7, but open to looking at how we can make those 7 areas more efficient or fair. I did get kicked off of this 2 times when you originally started speaking about this. So I know you mentioned about having an outside person. That's a possibility of doing a study. Was it noted what the cost of that was, Mayor Norman? I got booted off, so I'm not sure.
No, we haven't been able to determine that cost because first we need to know what direction we're going. And this is the 1st of February. So it's a discussion point. We don't want to discuss it for 3 months, but we could direct staff to come back with an approximate cost of what an outside agency would look like to come back with our numbers. So we don't have that at that point in time, but we also don't have to make the decision today. We can wait and see what the cost is and then weigh the cost of doing this against having it done in-house. Councillor Fancy?
I think the thing right now is I think what you pointed out, we want 6, 7, or 8. I don't think we need an outside source because I think we've already had outside sources and they divided up the way they think. We know how we have to work. So I think it's better for us to be able to look down once we get the census and know the numbers to be able to see how it works for us. And as you know, even when going around, I'm just even take my district in particular, people, when I go down to Bristol and they'd say, what are you doing here? You're in Milton. So they sometimes they can almost feel like they're not being represented the same because you're from another area. So we have to know that ourselves rather than have an outside source trying to figure out where boundary lines are. I think we can sit down and figure that out.
Councillor Gidney?
No, I'm listening. There's a lot of very good points, and I think it's just a lot more thinking. What thoughts got to go into this?
Before I recognize Councillor Brown, is there another councillor who wishes to speak? Councillor Romero.
I agree with Councillor Fancy. I don't think this is something we have to have costed out. I think we can do that ourselves. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Deputy Mayor Muse.
I think we can do it ourselves. I think we had Colin Sam Busker, I think, used to help us come up with some different ways before, and I don't know, the young Harlow man, I think that's working there now, if he could help us. But I, like in my district alone, like down the old Plumberton Road, I have one side, I have the people who voted my district, and on the other side, they voted in Ralph's district. So I think there's some problems we have to come up with. And I don't know, maybe town limits would be Council Gidney's and outside of town limits would be mine, but that way I'll leave my Carter's Beach alone. Anyway, I think we can do it in-house.
So I'm hearing in-house, though, remember, there is no rush for this. So we could, as Councillor Charlton suggested, see what the cost factor is. It may not be that high.
Mayor Norman,
Yeah.
past studies in other municipalities have been 15 to 20,000.
Woohoo. All right, so we know the price tag. Councillor Charlton?
I just wanted to clarify, I'm not saying I'm in favor of doing a study. I was just trying to understand, because I got kicked off, if that was discussed or talked about. So I'm in agreement with the other councillors that I think we could sit down and come up with a fair revision on our own. That's fine by me as well.
Yeah, now you'd realize that this is something that we as council don't sit down and do. Our staff do the work and come up with the numbers, and then they will present us with different scenarios. And once they come up with those scenarios, then we would work from the scenarios. But it has to be based, and hopefully Deputy Mayor Muse, your population has increased enough out there so you don't have to move into the town borders. But because that province, they don't insist, but they highly recommend, unless we can prove otherwise, they want to see that each district has no more than plus or minus 10% of a population swing. So if our karma is good, then our numbers will have increased enough that we can fit that within what we know works best. I mean, we know communities of interest work best. And it is like, we know that. So, so I'm hearing what about the amount of councillors? Councillor Brown?
I think we should almost wait to look at the numbers of councillors until we get the census numbers, because we don't know what communities have grown and even what it's going to look like and how we can divide things up. Because if we pick a certain number of councillors now that we're going to stick with, and then the census numbers say that one area grew quite a bit more than the other, then you're going to see more fracturing of the communities instead of trying to bring them together. So I would almost be in favor of looking at the census numbers before we even think about settling on a number of councillors.
Mayor Norman, if I may just clarify.
Yes.
We don't actually use the census numbers. They're of no value to us. And the actual detailed census numbers won't be available for another year or two, so it's much later. We actually use voters. So who's the number of census, the number of people is irrelevant. It's the number of voters. So we exclude children under the age of 18. We exclude people who are non-Canadians or non-residents. And so we only look at the number of voters, in which that data is readily available through our election lists.
So we are assuming that the election lists are updated and mimic what's actually out there.
So they should be updated. They're updated every election, provincial, municipal, federal. So the most recent election was it the provincial in August? Provincial election in August. I think that's the most recent. So that would be the most recent numbers. We're only 6 months old, which is pretty accurate.
Okay. I just assumed we used the census numbers, and I did see they were releasing population stats within the next 2 weeks, but I didn't realize they didn't break it down into like 19 and over and that. So
no, it'll be a year or two before you have detailed numbers like that, probably.
Okay, so that's too late. Okay, so we know that. Before I recognize Councillor Brown, any councillors who I've not heard from yet? Councillor Brown.
Would it be possible to get an update of those voters' numbers so that we could make a decision, have a look at how each district has changed?
Those numbers are available. We just had an election, as CA McNeil referenced. So what is the wish? This is a discussion point. What do you wish to do today? Councillor Charlton?
Couldn't we have some information brought back from staff in another discussion point where it could give some information about the eligible elector list to show how many are sitting where, and for staff to do what they need to do on their end about, some logistics, and they could present something to us and it could be in a discussion so that we still have, providing we have time, I'm understanding we do, so we can digest that.
Yes.
Okay, so we're all in agreement that we're going to do this in-house, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a big checkpoint. So we know we don't have to go out and tender and find someone. So we can start the process now. CA McNeil, it shouldn't take a lot of work to come up with the electoral lists. So we could move this to our next council meeting.
Going through the election list, if we're able to access it for this purpose, is a challenge to start with, but it will take significant time to go through and add up numbers of voters on each street in each district in order to get that number. It's a significant project during regular times, and so to do that in a couple weeks' time is not humanly possible.
Okay, so that
What
puts
kind
us-
of time frame would we need? Sorry, I'm just wondering what kind of time frame would we need? And so this is recommended that this be done every 8 years. So what was our deadline? The end of this
Every
year
8 years.
or? Yes, but what's the deadline for us to finalize this process? Is it the end of this year?
December 2022.
We have to
So
have. a
could we
report-
not?
Yeah.
Could we not direct staff to come up with this information in a time frame that's reasonable for staff and bring this back as a discussion point for us to digest?
I
Right.
believe we could do that. We don't want to linger it till fall.
Mayor
We
Norman,
need to decide the number of, we're supposed to, according to UARB, the first step is you decide your number of counselors. Your second step is you look at your population numbers and you work from there. That's the process UARB recommends. CEO McNeil?
just to clarify, I guess I think most people, if not everyone on council has indicated that there's boundary problems. And so to send staff away to do a calculation and go manually street by street to determine the number of electors in a particular electoral district today, I don't think is going to be helpful, because we've all acknowledged that the current boundaries aren't helpful. And so then we're getting numbers that aren't going to be useful to our new application. They're only going to be useful to explain to us the exacerbation of the problem we have now of boundaries don't line up or aren't geographically representative or geographically work for some councillors. When we go to the URB, we have to justify why we're proposing the status quo, or why we're proposing to add a counselor, or why we're proposing to decrease by a counselor. And so I think council needs to focus on governance, community values, community geography, changes in demographics, and those types of issues to determine if someone calls you as a counselor for a particular help, do we not have enough counselors? to deal with that? Does somebody have to wait for 2 days or 3 days or a week to get an answer because people are too busy? Do people have to travel too far a distance as a counselor to meet with their counselor, to see their counselor? Are counselors on too many committees that it's onerous for them and we need more counselors to spread out the workload? So those are the types of issues the URB is going to question us on. So it's not a simple process as we just submit that we just want to maintain the status quo. The status quo might be quite acceptable to council, might be quite acceptable to the URB, but we have to justify what we're going to do. I know the most recent boundary review municipality had, I think they had 10 councillors or 10 members of council. They didn't do their homework. They proposed to the URB that they were comfortable that everybody loved 10, and the URB cut them down to 5 because the URB felt offended that they didn't do their homework, didn't do their consultation, didn't consider other options, and said, you didn't do the work, we're going to do it for you, and cut them in half from 10 to 5. So it is a significant project. It is a serious matter before the URB. And it is, as you see, staff have provided you with a list in the back of this document of all the current boundary reviews from 2016. And they're all over the map. And when you see some of them have a average number of electors per councillor as low as 265. And if you take out Halifax and Cape Breton, there are some that are in 2000s and 3000s. So there are some that are, and so it is all over the map. And so the URB is going to look to us as to what our justification is. And so staff can do this in-house. We've done every one in the past in-house, but staff needs some direction or rationale as to why we want to, what we want to pick or what the options are and why we want to do it. And we do have access to our planning department who does our mapping as the deputy mayor has indicated. But every time we do an option, it's a significant amount of work to realign all those maps and all those boundaries and all the numbers. And so I just hope council will take some time and think about what the 2 or 3 options they want and be committed to those 2 or 3 options and not come back with 6 or 7 options or just leave it open, because then it's going to be all summer for 1 or 2 staff working on this completely all summer. And I don't think that's what council wants.
CEO McNeil, so when you speak what options councilors want, well, we know Deputy Mayor Muse really would rather not have part of his population in Liverpool. Councillor Fancy would prefer not having part of his population in Liverpool. Councillor Brown would prefer that his community of interest be Greenfield, Maliga, that area, Bangs Falls, but not Mill Village, Port Medway.
And those are all geography issues that the URB is really concerned about. Because
are they not communities of interest?
They are. So they're interested as far as its communities of interest. They're interested as far as the plus or minus 10%, but they don't necessarily know where Port Medway is versus Beach Meadows. They're relying on council to bring forth reasonable, well thought out proposals that line up well, and to argue that if all the residents in this particular area go to this particular school, that's a school of interest or a community of interest, and they would expect us to explain that in our application, that's why we put them together, because they all go to the same school, they're all in the same electoral district, they all go to the same community hall for functions. So that's what they look for in the application, but they're not going to typically scrutinize that, other than they're going to look to see that we do our homework and did we identify or address each one of those issues as far as community of interest, population numbers, and so on and so forth. The URB's main focus is on governance. And so if we were to go to 8, what difference would the public see from governance? If we were to go to 6, what difference is the public going to see? If we stayed at 7, what is the advantage of staying at 7? And that's where the URB is going to scrutinize us heavily as to how we came about those decisions.
So I've heard from the majority of councillors that they wish to stay at 7. So we would have to validate staying at 7.
That is correct. And if we don't provide a second option, which is fine, we don't have to, there's no requirement to do it, but you run the risk, like this other municipality who didn't provide other options, to at least provide a balance that we looked at other options and they didn't make sense, and here's why. The URB has no option other than to evaluate what you have, and they will make a decision for you, whether they agree or disagree, and decide what the number will be.
Councillor Charlton.
Thank you. I'm a bit confused because when I had mentioned previously about council sitting down and coming up with a plan with staff to revise this, Mayor Norman, it was mentioned about staff doing this. So I think council needs to be clear, it made clear what we need to tell staff so that there's not confusion on either end. And I'm just wondering if maybe this perhaps should be moved to a committee of the whole session where we have more time to discuss this and have questions that are suggested that need answers, so for things that aren't missed, especially for new councillors like myself who've not been through this process. I don't want to hinder the process or have information that's missed. And it's being said that these things have to come from council. So I think myself personally, I need more clarification about what I need to say and bring forward. And I'm not sure how other councillors feel, but I don't feel like it's very clear right now. And I just would like that clarified.
Those are legitimate areas of concern, Councillor Charlton.
And just, if I may, Mayor Norman, just sorry for speaking so much. The issue is council needs to decide what level of governance, as far as the number of councillors they think is fair and reasonable and what the public expects. And that it is staff's job to do the realignment. As Mayor Norman said, it's up to staff to do that, not council, because if council does it, then it becomes seen as council members realigning electoral districts specific to their personal interests.
Right.
And not to the public's interest or what makes sense for other reasons. And even if it doesn't work that way, that becomes the public perception. And so that's why many municipalities have hired outside consultants, so that there is that the outside consultant tells you, that you have input as far as where the communities of interest are, because they would have access to that information and school patterns and all that stuff, but it's independent. And as well, if staff do it, it's independent somewhat. But if councillors sit down and try to draw the maps themselves, then the URB, I think, would have a very serious question about the independence of the report.
And it's silent out there. Everyone's thinking. Councillor Brown.
So if we're asking for, staff are, I guess, asking for several solutions or several options to present to the UARB, we can ask them to look at, say, maybe a 7 council seating or an 8 councillor seating to see if we can realign one better than the other. Is that correct? Am I correct in my understanding of that?
I believe that is correct. Is that not correct, CAO McNeil? That we could direct staff to come up with 2 options, one for a 7, keep the status quo, and one to increase to 8.
It would be my recommendation, if you wish to make this a smooth process with very few problems with the URB, that you go forward with at least 2 options, so they have a comparison option. If council wishes to do 2 or 3, we can do that. If council wishes to do 1, that's fine. Staff will undertake that as well. Just makes it a harder argument when we have nothing to argue against, that another option isn't as good. So if that's the case, staff are hearing here today that the boundaries are a problem. And so any new option we come forward, whether it's a 7 option or a 7-8 or a 7-6, staff will come forward with options that correct the geographic, or propose to correct the geographic issues that have been raised here today, or that we recognize already exist.
Does that suit? Councillor Gidney, I've yet to hear from you. And Councillor Hawks, I'm waiting for your comments on this important matter.
This is a very important matter, and
It is.
We seem to be going in circles here. there are options, but I'm not sure exactly how we're supposed to proceed with them. I do agree that maybe boundaries should be looked at, the numbers within the boundaries and all those other things. Like, so without all the facts, I'm not sure how we can proceed. I don't know how we can go ahead if we don't know what we can or can't do. If we're supposed to have 10% plus or minus within the districts, can the districts all be reliant to do that, to make them more geographically correct? Like, like these things, I'm listening and trying to figure out what's the best route. There's been some very good ideas, but I need more time to digest all this. Thank you.
So basically, we need to prove to the UARB what the best governance system is for the taxpayers of the region of Queens. What is the best governance position it is? Are they best governed by 7 counselors, 8 counselors, or 6 counselors? What is the best governance? What is the best governance to cover Queens County? 6, 7, 8. Counselor Hawks.
The 7 as it is now is good, but with the population change, it could possibly go to 8. So I would be in favor of a 7-8 council, one or the other.
Okay, so Counselor Hawks is suggesting we direct staff to look at 2 options and to verify and justify 7 counselors and to verify and justify 8 counselors, and then reflect how the boundaries would look like in that instance. Counselor Fancy.
Going back to a couple of the remarks we've heard already, when I had mentioned about Bristol, when we first realigned and the Milton became, Bristol became part of Milton, people in Bristol said, I don't know what we got to do with Milton, but it's now people got used to it. So it's not a problem once you get used to what you're doing. And I know to have Milton to have the amount of people that would need, it would have to go over to people like Bristol, and that's fine. But a couple of things that our CEO had said here too, is you don't want to try to say we need 8 when are we having problems with, as you said, are we going to too many meetings? Are we doing too many things that we can't get to the people we can get to? We're having no problem getting to the people we're getting to. As you saw, there's some people in like Bridgewater, they get over 2,000. They having problem getting to the people to get to. If you're going to try to say 8, you got to justify that. I don't want them looking at that to say, as they said before, as he said, we did have one time to have 10 counselors and they cut them down to 5 because they said we don't need that many. So I don't want them looking at that. I don't want to try to say that we need 8 and all of a sudden they come back and say, well, you only need 6. So I don't want to them to go into that area. I think we're just looking at the geographical end of it. And I think that's part of what we need to do is that if we say we have to go back with 2 plans, one is to stay like we are, the other is to change the geographical stature of where we are. With us, that we're going to have some feedback to the staff, because we don't want the staff just to make something up and then all of a sudden we tear it apart because we said, well, that doesn't work for us. So it would have to be something where we'd have to give some feedback to let them make something up for us.
You have to keep in mind, it's about good governance. It's about what, if you are a taxpayer living in Middlefield, what would be good governance for you? If you were a taxpayer living in East Port LeBaire, what does good governance look like for you? But the first decision to start this whole process is the number of counselors. Where the boundaries are going to be, that is not something we're going to fiddle with. The staff do that research and come up with those dispersals, because we do not want to be seen by the UARB as coming up with something to protect the job of a counselor. They are interested in what is good governance for the people of Queens. That's what the UARB looks at. So 7 counselors, is that the option we want to remain with? Do you want to go to 6? Do you want to look at what 6 counselors would look like? Do you want to look at what
Mayor Norman.
maintained 7 or 8? Counselor Charlton.
So is it my understanding, Mr. McNeil said the best scenarios to present 2 or 3 options?
Yeah. 2 or
Okay.
3.
So if the consensus of council feels that 7 counselors is really a good number, then why don't we have staff look at showing what 6 looks like, 7 and 8? So we have both ends of that, so we can see exactly where we stand, and that will prove if 7 really is sufficient or not.
That's a very good suggestion. And I believe that may have been done other years. And then because that way, when the URB looks, they can see, here's the objective look at 6, here's the objective look at 7, here's the objective look at 8. And the cases can be proven that 7 is good governance, or 6 or 8. How do the rest of council feel about that? Presenting 6, 7, 8 as an option of governance for the region of Queens. Councillor Romero,
I think that's a good idea.
Councillor Brown,
I think it's a good idea to have the 3 options, but now I start to question if we're looking at 3 options and the amount of work it sounds like, is this going to put an undue amount of stress on staff that we have right now? And should we be looking down the road at whether we do this in-house or not in-house if we're looking at 3 options? I'm not sure what that looks like, and I'm not sure if CAO McNeil would be able to tell us or not whether putting together 3 options and 3 sets of boundaries for us to look at is going to be an undue stress on staff in the time we have to do it, especially going into budget.
CEO McNeil, that's a question directed toward you.
So as long as we're clear as far as what we want and we don't change our mind. So if we say we want 3 options, 6, 7, and 8, then it's fine, and staff can undertake that and get that done in a reasonable time frame. If we were to do 2 and then all of a sudden council decided, well, we don't like those, we want to do more, that then makes it much more complicated. So I appreciate the idea that doing them all up front. And if we're going to do 3, if that's what we want, then let's do the 3 up front. So just in a matter of timing, it's probably to do the original 3, it's probably the end of June, 1st of July. Council would then have time to review it. You'd have some public consultation the end of July and August. And then we would prepare the report, the final report in September, October, and submit it probably around the end of October, early November. Is probably the way it would work unless things changed. But so we're okay that way. But staff are fine with 3 options as long as we agree that we're all committed to the 3 options now and moving forward with doing that.
Can we all settle on presenting the UARB with 3 options, 6, 7, and 8? Councillor Gidney?
Just one question. Does this include the boundaries?
All of it does.
This would include, like, if we adjusted boundaries and things like that?
Yeah.
By all means, yes. Thank you. I misunderstood that. I am
Yeah.
100% in favor. Thank you.
Thank you. Is everyone else fine? So CEO McNeil, we don't need a motion for this because this is direction to staff. Am I correct or am I wrong on that?
So for the URB report, they require documentation for everything. So at the next meeting, staff will bring forward a similar report with a recommendation that council requests staff to prepare 3 options, a 6, 7, 8 option. And that satisfies the URB's requirements for the report, that clear direction was given, and that's why the 3 options were prepared.
So council, you're prepared, next council will see this as a recommendation and a motion that staff investigates 6, 7, and 8.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. It's good discussion, and I think something that our public will respect from us. Council implementation report. Did anyone have any questions on things? Everything seems to be, oh, I will make one note. You'll notice on November 23rd, we had made a motion and we had asked the NSFM to consider moving us to the regional caucus. Uncertain how many people received information. Last week, there was a notice of an emergency meeting sent out to all councillors, all mayors of the NSFM, the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities. They are suggesting a complete realignment and overhaul of the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities. There will be a detailed report on our next agenda. They are requesting, their executive and the board is requesting no more caucus, no more regional towns, rurals. They're looking now at zones, so we would be part of the social zone, but all that's coming next meeting. It will take, I think the NSFM are looking at fall, at their fall conference in order to have these changes made. So other than that one, we're not going to hear back from that. So other than that, is there anything, any other questions on the implementation report? Because we should have heard from them, but we're not going to hear from them now. Okay, the last public item is a financial review Q3, and Director of Corporate Services, Ms. Vino, is on the line. There is no recommendation. It's simply CEO McNeil. I thought these generally.
They do. That was absolutely my fault. It was late and I sent Christine the wrong report. But what I can do is we can discuss the report and I'll just bring back the recommendation for adoption at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. I know you're in the middle of doing budgets and work, so.
I'm juggling a few balls at the moment, but there's still no use.
Okay, so let's just have this for discussion and then we'll bring it back. Yeah.
Okay. So per the report, we saw, and I just would like to say that the Audit and Internal Control Committee reviewed this with me last night. D-transfer tax has leveled off a little bit. December's revenue of $85,632 still outpaced December 2020. This, however, was the first month since April that our revenue has been below $100,000 for the month. Total revenue in Q3 this fiscal was $406,000 versus Q3 in fiscal 2020, which was $167,000. So still our D-transfer tax is far outpacing where we thought it would be. And again, you know, inventory is decreasing. If anyone has been hearing anything about lack of houses for sale, that's certainly what we're seeing. However, you know, there seems to be sales. I don't know if people are just deciding to sell their house and move in with their mom and dad or whatever, but it's still going on, so that's good. The metal sales is really something that we should all congratulate Director Grant on, because we didn't budget for any metal sales because we sold a large amount last year in November 2020. Director Grant was approached in October by our purchasing broker with a significant offer, more than 3 times November 2020's price. Staff determined it was a prime opportunity to move on the sale of derelict works vehicles and equipment that had exhausted part salvage. So, you know, because we are very fiscally responsible, Director Grant and his staff use our old machinery and pilfer every part off of it that they can to save us money. But we had some vehicles that were, you know, beyond the pale. There was no way, there's nothing else to take. So they took this opportunity to clean those vehicles up to our benefit. of $64,859. So that was a great little bump in revenue. And typically in this revenue stream, we would see things like barbecues, hot water heaters, and lobster traps. So we don't usually see this big revenue stream in terms of metal sales. In the financial statement, you'll see section 2, the provincial grant in lieu of tax disbursements, they're paid and we've actually received them. That's why they're still blank for December, but we have actually received them to date. Miscellaneous revenues higher than budget. We received $16,500 insurance settlement to offset repair costs for the damaged door at the MRF facility. Drag race track revenue is part of this cost center because none was budgeted, so we put it in there. We also received a credit from GE Trucking for $9,300 for overpayments made in prior years. That was 2015. They had an overhaul of their books and their auditors found overpayments that were made by us. So they refunded us the $9,300, which was lovely. We didn't anticipate that either. And then we had $1,400 reimbursement for incremental wage costs due to the leak at Queen's Place Amera Center from Simcoe. Under other common services, we're again over budget because the cost center of the power. Remember, I talked about that in the last quarterly report. I can report to you that we've got a $41,000 credit from the Power Corporation. So that meter has been replaced. We are back to normal consumption rates on our admin building, and they have processed that credit for us, so we've requested a check. Queen's Place is still being significantly affected by COVID, as you all know. Budgeted revenue is slightly down on a year-to-date basis, but costs are down 64, almost 66% of budget. This is a reflection of effective management of staff and lower maintenance costs because, of course, the usage is down. And just a reminder going into the end of the year, the fiscal transfers, so section 8 is when we bring revenue in from reserves, and section 16 is when we expense things out to reserves. Most of those entries are made at the end of the year, and so those, if they appear to be incongruent with the budget numbers, is because we do that at the end of the year. And I know yesterday at the meeting, Councillor Charlton asked about resumming the expenditures because you as a council want to know in terms of what your surplus is going into budget. And if you look at the total expenditures now, you'll see that there's a $5.7 million surplus showing on our financials. But what you need to understand is that 85 to 90% of our revenue, we receive it in quarter 1 because those are our taxes. So we still have a whole quarter of expenses to go. And we do have a lot of year-end entries that go into, but as I committed to Councillor Charlton, when we go into the budget process, I will make sure that you have the most up-to-date budgets. It won't be obviously to the end of March, but you should be able to get an idea of where we are at the end of February going in. The next thing is capital projects. We talked about that at the last meeting. Court Street is not yet fully costed, so we're waiting for some invoices there. Union Street is completed and fully costed, so we came in under budget, 6% for Union Street. The airport fuel taxes, that was also a capital project, came in under budget. That project is complete and fully costed. The tandem truck, the budget was $140,000, and Councillor Grant sourced a used truck because the inventory available for sale in this market was severely affected by COVID, just like everything else. Market availability for used trucks is highly volatile, presenting equipment from poor condition to excellent prices from $15,000 to $250,000. Staff were able to source a good quality used piece of equipment that was under the proposed budgeted allowance and still satisfy all the operational requirements. So that used piece of equipment was still compatible with all the other pieces that we have on site. A reminder, if you're looking at the water, that there's a $103,000 expense. That is a year-end expense. So if you're thinking the utility made so much money there, again, this is one of the year-end expenses that we book. So in summary, with the exception of the above noted items, quarter 3 was as expected, and there were no unbudgeted reserves activity for the quarter. I do anticipate bringing a couple of items to council at the end of the fiscal year to ask your permission to make some unbudgeted reserve entries, but I will wait until I have them all and I've gone over all the books to make sure that I have all my ducks in a row and discussed it with the CAO. to make sure that we're in agreement. Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions of Ms. Vino? I think we're all, Councillor Brown?
I just want to thank Ms. Vino for making this all very clear for us last night at the Audit and Internal Control Committee and today. And I'd like to add that I was at the landfill site yesterday taking some stuff, and it is a very clean area. They have sold everything. You know, there's no metal out there at all. It looked really good. I didn't know why until she at the meeting last night, but it makes perfect sense now.
Any other questions? So next meeting, we'll just have a motion on our, to accept this quarterly review, to accept our third quarter review.
Yeah, I'll make a staff report with a recommendation, Mayor Norman.
Okay, thank you. Any questions before we move on? Okay, so that takes us to our in-camera items. I'll need a motion to move in camera. Moved by Councillor Gidney, seconded by Councillor Fancy. It is 10:21. If we can resume in 9 minutes time at, let's say, we have one item that we can begin discussion. We can start discussion on 9.2. Or do you wish to resume in camera at a later time? Should we, everybody okay to resume in camera discussion in 10 minutes with 9.2?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll do the call in and open the lineup. So we are moving in camera.
Vote on that?
Yes, we do. So motion to move in camera, moved by Councillor Brown. Oh, actually, it was moved by Councillor Gidney, was it not? It's already done, so passed.